I'm Marion. Standing in the middle of my wedding reception, surrounded by stunned guests and the weight of 24 years of lies, I can still feel the shock of that moment when my long-lost grandfather rolled into the church on his wheelchair. The air seemed to freeze as everyone's eyes turned to the man I thought was dead. It was a day that would shatter my world and redefine what family truly means. Let me take you back to the beginning. I worked as a senior grant writer for a local nonprofit, City Habitat Alliance, dedicated to improving affordable housing in Denver. One spring, I attended a community meeting focused on making these homes more energy efficient. That's where I met Ethan Thompson. He was there to present innovative HVAC solutions for the community. Most contractors who came to these meetings were all business, talking at the residents rather than listening. But Ethan was different. He pulled up a chair next to an elderly woman at the front and started asking about her energy bills. He wanted to know which rooms were too hot in summer and too cold in winter. I noticed his well-worn work boots under the table before anything else. They were the real deal, scarred from actual job sites, not the trendy kind you'd buy at a mall. After the meeting, he handed me his business card. It read Thompson Climate Innovations, owner and founder. I was surprised. You actually own the company? I asked. He replied, going on 6 years now. Started with just me and a van, and now we have a team of 28. He said it matter-of-factly, no trace of bragging. If your organization ever needs HVAC assessments for grant applications, we can do them at cost for non-profits, he offered. I called him 3 days later. At first, it was strictly professional, but by June, things had changed. We fell in love. My father, Richard Blackwood, was a managing partner at Blackwood & Stone, a high-profile corporate law firm in downtown Denver. He had built the firm from the ground up after law school, working 80-hour weeks for 20 years. He represented large corporations in complex contract disputes and mergers. He always wore custom-tailored suits that cost a fortune and drove a shiny black BMW that he replaced every couple of years. When I first brought Ethan to dinner with my father in mid-June 2024, it was a disaster. My father had insisted on meeting him, saying, "Anyone you're serious about needs to pass the family test." As soon as Ethan mentioned he owned an HVAC company, the atmosphere in the room turned frigid. My father's face went blank. HVAC? Is that like air conditioning repair? Ethan calmly corrected him, it's the design, installation, and maintenance of climate control systems, both residential and commercial. We just won a major contract with Denver General Hospital to upgrade their building automation controls. My father just sliced his steak with precision and asked, "Did you go to college for this?" Ethan responded, "I went to trade school and then worked for 8 years with other companies before starting my own." The rest of the dinner was my father firing questions at Ethan, trying to expose what he saw as Ethan's inadequacy. How much was trade school? Did he own or rent his home? What was his retirement plan? Each question was wrapped in a false guise of fatherly concern, but I could see his real agenda. He had already decided Ethan wasn't good enough for me. We barely made it through dessert. My father excused himself, claiming a work call. I found out later he sat in his car in the parking lot for a long time, just avoiding the situation. Over the next year and a half, his disapproval only grew colder. When Ethan proposed to me in December 2025 in his workshop, presenting me with my grandmother's ring that he'd spent months tracking down at estate sales, I called my father right away. All he said was, "I hope you know what you're doing," and then he hung up. The engagement dinner was even worse. He showed up half an hour late, sat at the head of the table, listened to Ethan talk about our wedding plans for 15 minutes, and then stood up. "I'm not feeling well," he declared. "Marion, we'll talk later." He left cash on the table for his untouched meal and walked out. My sister, Lily, was 4 years older than me. She had always been the perfect daughter in my father's eyes. She went to Harvard because my father wanted her to. She married Alexander Carter, a wealthy heir with a family in the publishing business. She had a high-paying job at a tech startup, all thanks to my father's connections. I, on the other hand, chose a path that would never make me rich. I went to the University of Colorado and majored in nonprofit management. I fell in love with a man who worked with his hands. In my father's eyes, I was a disappointment. 2 days after the engagement dinner, my father called and said, "I won't be contributing to the wedding." I replied, "Dad, I didn't ask you to." He then said, "Your grandfather would have hated this. He built everything from nothing and would have wanted you to aim higher." The mention of my grandfather, George Blackwood, stopped me cold. I barely remembered him. I was only 5 when he died, or so I was told. I had fragments of memory, his big hands that smelled like machine oil, a workshop filled with tools hanging on pegboards, and him teaching me to count using nuts and bolts on a workbench. The funeral was small, a private memorial service. My father said my grandfather wanted to be cremated immediately, with no viewing. There was an urn on a table at the front of the room. I remember seeing my father cry, the only time I ever saw him shed tears. I thought he must have been a very important man. After the funeral, my father removed all the photos of my grandfather from our house. When I asked why, he said it was too painful to look at them and that we needed to move on. I kept 3 photos. One in my wallet showed my grandfather holding me as a baby, both of us squinting in the sun. His eyes were the same color as mine. Over the years, I asked my father about my grandfather a few times, but he always gave me one-sentence answers and changed the subject. I thought it was just grief. On the morning of my wedding, March 7, 2026, I woke up at 6 a.m. Lily was already awake, sitting by the window in our hotel room, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. "Big day?" she asked without looking up. "Yeah," I replied. "Nervous?" she asked. "Not about marrying Ethan," I said. "But I'm worried Dad will show up and ruin it." She finally looked at me and said, "He'll come around. He's stubborn, but he won't miss walking you down the aisle. It'd be too embarrassing for him." I wanted to believe her. I'd been telling myself the same thing for weeks. At noon, I got a text from my father saying he needed to talk to me in the bridal suite at 1:30 before the ceremony. I showed the text to Lily. Her face tightened. "Maybe it's good news. Maybe he'll apologize," she said. "Or maybe he wants to talk me out of it one last time," I countered. The ceremony was set for 2 o'clock at St. Mark's Episcopal Church. I'd paid for the wedding myself, spending $18,000 that wiped out my savings. It was strange because my father had spent over $100,000 on Lily's wedding in Boston in 2019, with a full orchestra, 300 guests, and a reception at a historic mansion. For me, all I got was silence and a text. I arrived at the church at 1:15. The wedding coordinator met me at the side entrance and led me to the bridal suite, a small room with a couch, a mirror, and a window overlooking the parking lot. Lily helped me into my simple ivory silk dress. My bouquet was made of white lilies and eucalyptus, arranged by Ethan's mother. At 1:25, Lily stepped into the hallway, saying she'd give us privacy when my father came. Exactly at 1:30, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," I said. My father walked in, wearing his usual charcoal suit and a pale blue tie. His face was set, and I knew he'd already made up his mind. He didn't sit down or ask how I was feeling. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at me like a lawyer examining a bad contract. "Marian, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to really hear me. This is a mistake. Ethan Thompson is not the man you should build a life with. He doesn't have the education, the connections, or the financial stability to give you the future you deserve. You're too young to see it now, but you'll regret this." My hands were shaking as I tightened my grip on the bouquet. "I love him, Dad," I said. He scoffed, "Love isn't enough. Your grandfather built a business from nothing, and so did I. We worked our whole lives to give you and your sister opportunities, and you're throwing it all away for a man who fixes air conditioners. I retorted, he owns a company with 28 employees. He just signed a $520,000 contract with a hospital. He's running a successful business, not just fixing air conditioners. My father's jaw tightened. If you marry him, I will not walk you down the aisle. I refuse to let you embarrass the entire Blackwood name. The room fell silent, except for the soft organ music filtering in from the sanctuary. There were 200 guests already seated, waiting. I looked at my father and suddenly realized that he didn't love me for who I was. He loved the idea of who he wanted me to be. When I chose my own path, I ceased to be valuable to him. Then don't, I said quietly. He seemed startled. What? He asked. Don't walk me down the aisle. I'll do it myself, I replied. For a moment, a flash of surprise or maybe calculation crossed his face, but then it was gone. You'll regret this, he said and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Lily rushed in, her face pale. He left, she said. I know. I saw him, I replied. I sat down on the couch, still holding my bouquet. The silk of my dress suddenly felt like a heavy burden. My hands had stopped shaking and turned numb. There were 200 people in the sanctuary, dear friends, Ethan's family, colleagues, and distant relatives. They had come from far and wide, bringing gifts, waiting for a wedding that now seemed in jeopardy because I had no one to walk me down the aisle. The wedding coordinator knocked softly. Miss Blackwood, is everything all right? We're about 10 minutes from start time, she said. Lily went to the door, said something, and then closed it again. What do you want to do? She asked. I honestly had no idea. All my life, I'd been taught that family was always there, that blood was thicker than water, and that fathers protected their daughters, especially on days like this. My father had just proven that was a lie. I sat there in silence for 6 minutes. The organist kept playing the same hymn on loop. It felt like a countdown. Then there was a knock on the door, a firmer one than the coordinator's. Lily opened the door, and it was Reverend Miller, our pastor. He was a kind-faced man in his 60s, who had counseled Ethan and me during our premarital sessions. Marion, sweetheart, I don't want to add to your stress, but there's someone here who insists he knows you. He arrived a few minutes ago in a wheelchair. There's a woman with him named Nancy, he said gently. He called you Mimi, a nickname only my grandfather used to call me. I was 5 when he died. The world seemed to tilt. He says he's your grandfather, Reverend Miller continued, his voice uncertain. He says he's been waiting 24 years for this. I stood up, my legs unsteady. Where is he? I asked. At the side entrance with the woman, Nancy, and there's a nurse with them too, Lisa, I think, he replied. I walked down the hallway, my dress rustling against the carpet. My heart was pounding in my ears. The side door was propped open, and the afternoon light streamed in. There, in the doorway, was an old man in a wheelchair. He was 82 years old, as I would later learn. His hands trembled on the armrests. He wore a cardigan over a button-down shirt, dress pants, and polished shoes. His hair was white and thin, but his eyes were the same color as mine, just like the man in the photo in my wallet. I stopped in my tracks. I couldn't move or breathe. He was crying silently, like a man who had held his emotions in for far too long. Mimi, he said, his voice shaking. You're so grown up. I knew your mother's eyes. You have her eyes. I thought I'd never see you again. Your father told me you forgot about me and didn't want to know me. I knelt down in my wedding dress. The silk pooled around me. I reached out and touched his hand. His skin was warm and papery. We buried you, I whispered. I was at your funeral. I saw Dad cry. A woman stepped forward. She was in her 50s, with brown hair and a nervous energy. I'm Nancy Harris. I'm your grandfather's second cousin. I live in Boulder. This is going to sound crazy, but your grandfather has been alive this whole time. He's been in a nursing home in Colorado, near Aspen, for 24 years. My mind couldn't process it. I looked at my grandfather, who was nodding, tears streaming down his face. He made me sign papers after the stroke. I couldn't read or write properly then. He said it was for your protection, but then they took me away, and no one came. I thought you didn't want me, he said, his voice rough. Another woman, younger, in her 30s and wearing scrubs, stepped forward. I'm Lisa Moore. I'm a nurse at Alpine Ridge Nursing Home where Mr. Blackwood has been living. I found out about your wedding 3 weeks ago when I Googled his name and saw an announcement with your name on it. It said, granddaughter of the late George Blackwood. But he's not late. He's been in room 20 for 24 years. Your father told the facility he had no family who could visit. He paid cash, under the table, no insurance, no paper trail, just cash every month to keep him hidden. My brain was in a whirlwind. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My grandfather was dead. I'd been to his funeral. There was an urn, and my father had cried. Nancy knelt beside me. Your grandfather listed me as an emergency contact back in 2001 before his stroke. After 2002, I could never reach him. The facility said he didn't want contact. I thought he'd moved on from our family. I didn't know Richard had changed everything until Lisa found my name on the original admission form and called me. We came as fast as we could. I asked Lisa, how did you get his records? She replied, your grandfather requested them. It's his legal right. I helped him get copies, and when I realized what was going on, I documented everything. Colorado law says I have a duty to report suspected elder abuse. She held up a manila folder. These aren't stolen records. They're evidence. My grandfather reached out and took my hand. I have something for you, he said. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his cardigan pocket with his trembling hand and gave it to me. I unfolded it carefully. It was a nursing home admission form dated April 12, 2002. The patient was George Blackwood, admitted by Richard Blackwood, son and legal guardian. The family contact section read, patient has no reachable family. Son is sole contact. My father's signature was at the bottom, bold and clear. The ceremony was supposed to start in 8 minutes. 200 people were waiting. The organist was still playing. And the man who was supposed to walk me down the aisle had just driven away. But the man who should have walked me down the aisle 24 years ago, the man my father had erased from our lives, was here. Grandpa, can you give me away? I asked. He nodded, crying harder. I was supposed to 24 years ago. Before he took everything away. Let me finish what he stole. At that moment, Ethan appeared at the side entrance. He must have heard the commotion. He saw my grandfather, saw my face, and the admission form in my hand. Marion, he said, kneeling beside me. Whatever this is, you're not alone. If you want to walk down the aisle with him, we'll do it. If you want to stop and figure this out, we'll do that too. You don't have to choose between your wedding and the truth. We'll have both. I looked at my grandfather, this man I'd mourned as a child, who'd been alive all these years, thinking his family had forgotten him. Okay, I said. Let's do this. Nancy positioned herself behind the wheelchair. Lisa stayed close, protective. Reverend Miller went back to the sanctuary to tell the organist we were ready. The processional music, Pachelbel's Canon in D, started. The double doors to the sanctuary opened. My grandfather's wheelchair was beside me. I stood next to him, my hand on his shoulder, and Nancy pushed from behind. Every head in the sanctuary turned. I could hear the collective intake of breath, the gasps, and the whispers spreading like wildfire. In the third row, Mr. Henderson, a long-time family friend who had known my grandfather, half stood from his seat and whispered to his wife, "That's George Blackwood." "I can't believe it." We walked slowly down the aisle. The wheels of the wheelchair made a soft rhythmic sound on the carpet. I could feel